Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I remember in the early 90s the term Gen X came out. I thought it was great. We were edgy. We were this lost generation. We were cool. And now I'm 57 and I'm just this dad that doesn't understand, which is pretty funny and entertaining to me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we experience and are experiencing this really interesting period in history where things are just a little bit different. In some ways, I feel as though like we're the generation that got blindsided, but I'll get to that in a little while. But I was thinking about it. I was born in 1968, so I'm 57 years old, and I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime, and so have you if you're a Gen X. The whole thing with the cell phones and the internet and Amazon and what else am I forgetting? Computers in your house and all that kind of stuff, because we didn't have them back in the day unless you were a really unusual kid. And while all of that is really, amazing, like how many things have happened and how much life has changed, I don't think it's as big of a change fundamentally as the changes that happened, like say at the turn of the century to the time that we were kids. When I'm talking about things like electricity in every house, the ubiquity of indoor plumbing and cars becoming a thing that just about everybody had, and the robust middle class being an actual thing, and airplanes and radio and the ability to call people via the telephone, and the world changed dramatically in that time period. And while it's still changed since then, I don't believe it's changed on a fundamental level the way it changed for the people that were older than us. And of course, I've experienced all these changes, so maybe I've experienced them incrementally, so it doesn't seem as big. But just looking back, really thinking hard about when I was a kid, man, if we had smartphones, we would have used them. We would have figured them out in 5 seconds. But it seemed like there were so much bigger changes that happened in the 50 or 60 years before we were born. If we're really honest, probably the most radical changes we saw as kids were cable TV and like, did you have a color TV in your house or not? And between you and your grandma, maybe only one of you had a color TV, and sometimes it was grandma. And then we all had them. One thing I forgot to mention, but I think is really important, is by that time, we were really firmly in the industrial age. I mean, of course, the Industrial Revolution had happened way before that, but at this point, it was ubiquitous. Not too many people didn't work for somebody else, didn't work in factories, didn't work for bigger corporations. Yeah, there were a lot of smaller businesses, but, as time went on, those kind of evaporated. But we were already right there at the time. Anyhow, we were really little in the 60s. We really didn't experience too much of it because we were pretty small. We came of age kind of in the 70s, or were kids in the 70s and did most of our getting hurt and playing like crazy in the 70s. And we didn't realize it, but like a fundamental change had started to happen. And we get to the 80s, and the 80s were crazy. They really had bad fashion. We had some pretty interesting music in the 80s, and things were crazy. Money seemed to be everywhere. Things were incredibly expensive. I remember playing in bands, and the cover charges were like $5 or $10, and people were paying it. And that was a lot of money in 1980 or 1980, 88, 85, 86, when we were playing. And it was amazing, like just how much some other things cost. Like I never did cocaine out of all the drugs I did, and that was like $100 a gram back in the day, and I don't know what it costs now, but it seems like it stayed that price for a long time. People were paying a lot of money for some really wild things because it seemed to be everywhere. But a fundamental thing had changed, and that's like late 70s and into the 80s. The taxes on the rich had been really slashed, and a lot of regulations, a lot of things had become deregulated. And we didn't see the effects of that right away. And we were kids. We didn't even realize what was happening. There were other things that seemed to be more pressing, like civil rights and, the various unrest in the world at that particular time. We're always worried about something, aren't we? But that was not on our radar. Maybe some people, were thinking about that. But of course, hindsight is 20/20, and now I can look back and see some things that really started to change and shift how the world worked. And what I mean is we got sold the same kind of deal that our parents got sold, that the boomers and the silent generation, I think what they were called, got sold. This idea where you go to school, you get, go to college, you get a good job, you work your 40 years, you get the pension, you retire. And not only that, not only get told that, but we saw models of that all around us. My grandmother worked for the same factory for decades, as far as I know. And my mom, she went back to school when I was a teenager, got a degree, and then worked for this one company for at least, I think, a couple decades. We saw this model around us. Out of high school, I got kind of insulated from the economy because I got a state job. I was working in healthcare. So these people, they needed care whether or not the economy went up or down. Of course, it had, upturns and downturns. And I got paid a decent amount of money, more money than the people in the private sector were being paid. And if anything, I don't think I was being paid too much. I think they were being paid too little. So I didn't really see what was going on in terms of the actual economy until I, lost a state job due to active addiction like 18 years later. And then I kind of got my first taste of what was going on, although admittedly, I was still deep in active addiction. So it wasn't really until 2012 when I entered the workforce as a new person that I really started to see some of the things that had changed, or how messed up a lot of things were. And what I saw, and what a lot of us saw, was that something wasn't quite right. And that's why I kind of say we're the generation that got blindsided a little bit, because we did everything that we were supposed to do. And all of a sudden you realize, well, wait a minute, things are different than they were for our parents. They were different than they were for, like, say, some of our older siblings. And listen, like, a lot of my peers did really well. I'm not saying that, everybody didn't end up okay. I think if I had not gotten into addiction, and I had not made some other decisions I made in my life, things would be a little different. But I don't believe they would be the way they were for the people that came before me, because things are changing. I'm watching people that have done the right thing the entire time, and life is not going the way it's supposed to in terms of the economics and, how are they going to retire and all that kind of stuff. The deal has changed significantly. And some of the older millennials got caught up with us, but I think most of the millennials started to see, well, things are different. Something's different now. And Gen Z completely saw it. So we're this generation that's getting kind of blindsided. And the weird thing about it is, or the things I've experienced is, this is happening. You're starting to wake up at like 40 or 45 or 50 or whatever it is, or 57. And you get hit with this, oh man, things are not working out the way I thought they would, the way that people told us they would. But man, I'm old now. Really not that old. 57 is not that old. I'm telling you, I feel really young in my head. Not like Peter Pan, but just, some people are just in such a hurry to get old. And you ever notice that? Some of your classmates, they just look like your great aunt, and they talk like them, and it's like, you don't want to slap them. Okay, stop being so damn old. But anyhow, we got hit with this realization that things were different, and we'd already lived a big chunk of our lives. And you get that feeling sometimes like, man, I'm not sure if I can pivot. I'm kind of tired. I don't know, if I've got the energy to do it again, or, I've got all these other obligations and the mortgage, and I've already done with the thing with the kids, or maybe I'd look stupid to do something else, or you get the idea. And I am not for a second saying that we have it easier than the millennials or Gen Z, because they're getting hit with this immediately. I'm just saying, for a lot of us, we get, at least my experiences, when we get hit with this realization, we're waking up like Neo in the Matrix, and we're older, and like, oh man, you got to be kidding me here. This is not what I signed up for, but this is what's going on. It's not the worst time in history. It's just a time in history that we're living right now. So I think we've had an interesting experience. We've seen things change gradually. Some of us saw it earlier than others. A lot of us are kind of cynical because we've seen a lot of the promises, and in various ways, a lot of the lies. We've seen, our rose-colored glasses have cracked in terms of looking at many things, and we've seen a lot of life for what it is. And so, yeah, we're cynical. We've been in this unique position to see the dream in action, and then to see this slow collapse of what was happening and see where we are now. And we got to experience some pretty good times in the 80s. Like I said, there was a lot of money. Things seemed, it was kind of like the Roaring 20s. These aren't the Roaring 20s now, but it was pretty wild at the time. And now we're seeing things that are different. And we're being told that Soundgarden and Nirvana is old people music. I watch people walking around Nirvana t-shirts, and I'm thinking like they're like Beatles t-shirts or something like that we might have worn back in the day. Can you relate? And, I should have mentioned this earlier, but we were one of those generations that a lot of us got told, kids should be seen and not heard. And we didn't get asked our opinion that much. We started to get asked our opinion sometimes, but we were pretty much told what we should do, what we should think. And I think that's one of those reasons it took us a little more time to wake up a little bit, and why it's a little bit harder for us to react when we see that things are really, really broken, and maybe we need to change our approach to life. Because, a lot of us have had our authentic selves kind of squished by the programming that we received. And we've also experienced a lot of our lives trying to be this model person that all of a sudden, this isn't working out for us. And yeah, I know I've been harping on this subject a lot in my videos lately. It's just something that's on my mind. It's just something that I've been experiencing in my own life, and realize that there's got to be a lot of other people, my age, my contemporaries, us old people, that are experiencing the same thing and wondering, what do I do next? And so I'd love to hear if you've had, can you relate to this experience? Have you had similar experiences? What has your experience, I hate to keep using that word, been as you've transitioned through life and seen all these things happen. Is your perspective different than mine? I would love to hear what your perspective is. Thanks a lot for watching.